having a bit of a conversation and a chat with you about what I call the advice trap. And as John said, I've been involved probably more in the coaching realm than mentoring, but have done a lot of both over the last years, and spent a fair amount of my time doing that overseas as well, predominantly in Cambodia, working with emerging leaders there. It's good to be here, and I hope that we can have a good chat, that you will get some good stuff out of this tonight, and I'm sure you will. I don't know if anyone saw the little teaser video that they asked me to do, but one of the things that I think as human beings generally we do love to do is to give people advice. I'm not sure whether you're the same as me, but I do find that whenever I'm in wherever I have an opportunity to put my 2 cents worth in, it's actually, I have to be consciously aware to not do that, because otherwise I would just do it all the time. And so I want to talk a little bit about advice. I want to talk a little bit about the kind of advice givers that we are, or that some people are at least, and help maybe you identify kind of where you fit in that kind of realm. And also kind of talk about the idea of, I guess, listening longer and staying curious. For me, are absolutely critical, but both in coaching and mentoring, but also I have 2 adult children and 1 wife. And in giving advice to family as well, it's just as important, I think, to learn to listen longer and to stay curious, and to learn how to use questions well in that process. Why giving advice is not always the best idea, particularly for men. I think we do like to be one of the types of kind of advice givers is the fixer. And I think men generally like to fix problems. And there's nothing wrong with that, of course, but I think that in itself can hold, in our role sometimes as friends or mentors, present itself with some problems. So a few reasons why I think that giving advice is not always the best idea. But I think generally when people present problems or issues in their life, I think if we can learn not to give advice more than we give advice, I actually think we're on a better path. One of the reasons is that we often miss the real issue. When someone is talking to us or presenting a concern or an issue or a problem or something that they're kind of walking through, and they kind of blurt this thing out, often if we jump straight in and give advice around what we've just heard, we often miss actually what's really going on for that person. And we can end up giving advice on the wrong issue or the wrong problem. And so one of the reasons why I aim to listen longer and stay curious is because I really need to know what is going on for this person underneath what they've just told me. And you won't necessarily get that in the first part of the conversation, which is why the curiosity in the questions is really, really important. And so to me, if we give them advice, and of course, we all think that what the advice that we're going to give them is the best advice they're ever going to hear, right? Just by nature. I think, I don't know if you're the same as me, but when my brain just automatically starts thinking about all the good things I could tell them, all the advice, all the, helpful hints, all the tools, all the, things that I could give them actually going to help them. And to try and actually stop my brain from doing that so that I can listen intently and intentionally to what they're saying, so that I can actually understand and get to the real issue. And so when we jump in with our great advice, which kind of leads into the next point, which is our advice is kind of biased and flawed anyway. I'd be curious to know, out of 10, how good you actually think your advice is. I actually asked my wife this question, and Ange knows Jen, and she reckons her advice for me is usually 9 out of 10. So I'm not 100% sure whether how true that is, but yeah, I don't know what you think about your advice, because your advice is based on your worldview, based on your perspective of the world, based on your experiences growing up, based on what you know, what you've learned, where you've come from, what you've experienced. And it may not be the best advice to give to someone else who's actually experiencing something completely different to what you've experienced. And so we think our advice is great, but let's be honest, I think most of the time our advice is flawed. It's definitely biased. And so those two things in and of themselves can mean that the advice that we give can actually create more harm than good for a person who's walking through something. And then I think the last two for me are probably really important as well, because they're all about the self-discovery for the person. I believe that you cannot create change around something that you're not aware of. And so creating awareness for a person so that they can actually then do the work of self-discovery and self-empowerment to actually create the change, to create the transformation. Instead of me just going, hey, if you just tick these 3 boxes, do these 3 things, read this book, go and do this, then everything's going to be okay and everything's going to be wonderful. To actually encourage the person in this journey of self-discovery, because I think that's where the growth really comes. And I know for me, my own experience is that self-discovery so that I can actually do the work myself, so that I can, become the best version of myself that I can become. And so I think I do think it's a challenge. I think we genuinely want to help people. We genuinely want to speak words that are actually going to help create change for people. And because of that, I don't think it's a motivation issue. It's not like, we want to give advice because we're motivated to do that for the wrong reasons. I think generally, particularly in this context of mentoring men, where our heart is for people. We want to serve people. We want to see people grow. We want to see them empowered. We want to see them create that transformation in their life. But I think we need to be really careful and challenged about giving advice. Now, it doesn't mean that, I get asked advice all the time because of my role, some of my experiences I've walked through, particularly in the leadership sphere. People are asking my advice all the time because I think some people see that as the quick solution. If Brett can give me his advice and I place the Brett advice onto my life, then I will get to where I want to go quickly. And it just doesn't work like that. And so even in the leadership sphere, I'm very careful about the kind of advice that I give people. And I follow the same model, whether I'm working with a CEO of a massive organization and doing executive coaching, and whether I'm working with a friend or whether I'm working with someone in the community. To me, it's no different. I'm very aware these days of not giving advice. Now, I don't know where you might fit in one of these 3 advice givers. I don't know if you can see them on your screen. But the 3 types of advice givers, and there's probably a lot more, but there's the fixers, there's the fanatics, and there's the fortune tellers. Now, I'll give you a little bit of a breakdown of these 3, and then we're going to spend some time in some breakout rooms. And one of the questions that I want you to ask is kind of, where do you think you fit? What type of advice giver are you, and why? So the fixers are the ones that always see the problems that need to be fixed. It's not, and none of these are bad, by the way. It's not like, you're a bad person because you're a fixer. It's just the way that you see problems or issues, or in the concepts of wanting to bring advice. You want to fix the problem. And as I said, I think a lot of the time, men in particular fit into this category because we like to fix things. If there's a problem, we want to fix it. And so, that's just how brain works. So we see a problem, we automatically want to fix it. It might be something that we've experienced or something that we are familiar with. And so we already identify a solution. And so we're already jumping into this place of, I see the problem, I know the solution. If you do this, it'll fix it and everything will be okay. And as I said, our motivation is good in that we want the problem fixed for the person. But sometimes, and this is true for all of these, is that we're doing this kind of behavior and jumping into this kind of advice-giving trap because it's actually meeting a need for us, not necessarily because it's doing the right thing for the person that we're mentoring or supporting or coaching. Because if I fix a problem, then that actually makes me feel good. And so sometimes we need to be aware that the reason why we jump in to give advice or to try and fix a problem is because of what that actually gives us. And that sometimes can get us a little bit mixed up. We have the fanatics. The fanatics are kind of like your best friends. They're all very excited. They want to kind of come alongside you and do what they can, and they're champion you, and they've always got something to say. They're good people, they're carers, but they're super fanatical about your life being better. And they're good people to have around. Sometimes they're more fanatical about your life becoming better than they are about their own. But they're very, effervescent, big personalities. They're often very loud. They'll speak over the top of you, and very, very keen and committed to giving you the advice that they think that you need that's going to make your life better. And then we have the fortune tellers. And I guess the fortune tellers, they're the people that have kind of been there before. Like they sort of come to the advice giving trap with this kind of mentality is, I don't want you to experience what I've been through. I've experienced what you've done before, and this is where it ended up for me. So they kind of bring this in a sense, and sometimes it's a good thing. And we need to be aware that not always giving advice is bad. It's just that I think we need to listen longer and stay curious. And so we're actually prolonging the advice giving so that we're actually doing it well in that context. And so the fortune tellers is all about almost like, if you keep going down this track, this is where you're going to end up. So they're kind of like, they're worried and they want to give you advice because they don't want you to end up here. They've seen it all before, they've experienced it themselves, they've done all their research, and they're trying to protect you from a bad future, if you like. So I'm curious, as we're just going to jump into some breakout rooms in a sec, there's a couple of key questions that I want you to chat about. The first one is, or the second one is what I just mentioned there. What type of advice giver are you and why? I'm definitely a fixer. I love fixing problems and rearranging stuff and making everything work wonderfully and beautifully and arranging all the pieces nice and neatly. And, I love fixing problems, whether that's a squeaky gate or whether it's, something wrong with my daughter's car, or, I just generally love to fix. And then that correlates into the way that I am motivated to give advice and why I would jump in, because I see a problem. I think I have the solution, and so I want to fix it. So I'm definitely more of a fixer. And then the other question I wanted to kind of wrestle with is, what triggers you to give advice? What is the thing that happens? Is it emotion that someone shares? Is it someone sharing something that you feel you have knowledge about? Or is it as simple as when I get asked the question? What triggers you to give advice, and what kind of advice giver are you and why?
Go, Simon.
So you are actually going to let me do that? Yeah, fair enough. In our group, we had 5 people who said they were either fixers, reluctant fixers, or frustrated fixers, and 1 person who was a fortune teller. And one of the things that we really talked about there was what motivates us to give us advice. And I think this probably resonates across everything that we do with mentoring men is essentially the need to help and the want to help. And whether that is always right or wrong, it is something that I think a lot of us have within ourselves, is that we just want to help people. And so that really resonated with a lot of people. The other thing we talked about as well was just right at the end was about how if you don't provide advice and you do allow the conversation to just flow itself, or to be silent in that, and allow the answer or the solution to come to people organically rather than you constantly talking through that, is really quite a powerful tool that mentors should have, and is a really powerful tool that you can have across the board, not just as mentoring, but in business and in life as well.
Is by waiting and listening longer, or kind of letting the conversation get to the point where the solution becomes organic, or even better, the solution comes from the person themselves, which is in some ways for me the kind of the goal. It's a much more powerful than me just jumping in. And so, yeah, I think, as I said before, the motivation to give advice is because we want to help people. So it's, the motivation is good. And so it's, we're not bad people because we want to give advice. It's just learning how we do that better, or how we do it slower is probably the key takeaway is do it slower, listen longer, stay curious.
Observation I thought was really valuable, and that was the idea that there's a pathway. This is me paraphrasing, gentlemen, so please adjust if you need to, but there was a pathway from fixing to being a sort of a much more effective reserved fixer, which was allowing others, through the acquisition of skill, to be there, to sit in their space, to hold someone safely, right, and caringly, to allow them to fix themselves. And that was like something we learned either through experience or training. I thought that was really spot on for mentoring men.
It was interesting to start the discussion, because as mentors, we are all supposed to lend an ear to listening. And it was interesting to actually note that we all have some kind of difficulties of actually listening at times. And I mean pure listening rather than giving advice. So we have to probably practice the power of silence a bit more, which is an imperative, I think, if you want to be a good mentor. And you just have to go through that once in a while of sitting there, saying nothing and not even listening, just listening to the silence. In the mentoring session, instead of just giving advice, asking the mentee, I've had an idea. Are you interested? Would you be interested in discussing that? And I think it was a great idea, a great way to actually give control of the meeting to the mentee and make him feel comfortable. And you can then follow that up with either just listening, because he chose the topic or he agreed with you choosing the topic, or giving advice.
I think it's a really good point. I guess it depends on the relationship that you have with the person. And so if you have a very strong relationship already with the person, it's probably not, the permission's already there, I guess, by the relationship. But I think if you're establishing a new relationship, a new mentor-mentee relationship, then I would always be really clear about, getting permission, making sure that people are okay with it, for sure.
Yeah.
It just opens up that. And I mean, again, as I said, it's about building trust. I mean, one of the things that I'm quite, I guess, passionate about in a leadership space is the role that trust plays in leadership. But it's also a massive in mentoring as well. So if you have that high level of trust with someone, you probably don't need to be asking the permission. But if you're building trust with a new person or someone you don't know that well, then definitely.
Sometimes when it's a very technical thing, it's okay to give advice, but that's something you have to consider at the time. I think opening up ideas and asking questions can lead you to a place where that advice comes from the other person rather than giving it too quickly.
Yeah, and I think I know my last slide, I've sort of got pretty much those three things. The power of great questions, the art of active listening, and then I'm going to give you, I guess, the three best questions that I use for curiosity. And they might be helpful for people to have in their kind of toolkit, if you like. One of the issues around giving advice. And so if you look at this point here, level 4, which is you're meeting with someone, and this is where they are down the bottom at level 4, okay? It's not where they want to be, but it's where they are. And generally this place, it doesn't, it does not feel good, right? And it's not good for them. And they recognize that they want to create change, and they want to move to here. Here's where they want to be. This is where it feels good, and it is good for them. But they can't just jump from kind of level 4 to level 1 in one fell swoop. There's a process. The level 3, there's things that they need to let go of to get there. And this is their comfort space. Most of the things that they hold on to in this space here are around security, comfort, because this here, level 3, the things they need to let go of, they generally feel good, but they're not good for them, if that makes sense. And then the things that they need to do, which is level 2 here, generally these things, particularly when we first start, they don't feel good, but they are good for you. And we have to move through, I guess, if you like, to create the change that we want to create. We've got to kind of move. This is simplified, obviously. But when we give advice, what we tend to do is we tend to miss either this section here or, in particular, level 3, the things that they need to let go of. And we're straight away generally trying to tell them what they need to do to get to level 1. Okay, so we're trying to give them advice. If you do these things, which is here in level 2, which sometimes don't feel good because it might be you've got to give up something and it's not going to feel good, right? It might be that you've got to get up early and go for a run every day if you want to get fit. It might be you've got to cut out hot chips in your diet, whatever. Generally the things we need to do to create change initially don't feel good. Eventually they do, because they move us into that level 1. And this is the danger of jumping in to give advice, is that we miss the all-important level 3, which is the things that they need to let go of to get to where they want to get. And what tends to happen, if you like, is people jump. They recognize things that they may need to let go of, and they kind of jump into level 2. But because this level 3 creates such comfort for them, or certainty or familiarity or security, they find that they kind of jump in and out. They kind of they try for a week and they can't do this, it's too hard, and they jump back into the old ways because the old ways create that comfort. And so one of the dangers around the jumping in to give advice is we miss this important aspect of dealing with the level 3, the indulgences, the things that people need to let go of to create the change that they need to create, because we're focused on what they need to do. And that's the second part, if that makes sense. So in a sense, they've got to kind of go around it the right way. if they want to create the change that they want to create. There you go, a little bit of whiteboard magic. I hope that made sense. It kind of felt weird doing it on my little whiteboard in front of me, but I'm glad it worked. But this is that again, just to identify, I think sometimes that if we jump into the advice without staying curious and listening longer, then we do have that, we may miss what's really important, what's really going on, and what we really need to change. This was my kind of roundup slide, if you like, which is talking about, and a lot of this has come out of your small group discussion about staying curious and listening longer. And those three things there, you know, the power of great questions. One of the things I try to encourage other coaches and mentors is to not use the why question. I think we can easily find ourselves using that sort of, you know, why this or why that, or why would you do this, or why, you know. And so I really try and encourage mentors and coaches that I train to not use the why question, because it can be, it just has a negative connotation. And you may have learned this stuff in mentor training, but I just, it's one of my kind of don'ts, if you like. The art of active listening, and that came up in the conversation quite a bit as well. I actually think that's something that we need to learn. You know, I say to people, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. We need to listen twice as much as we talk. And so I think learning the art, and I think it is an art. I don't think it's something that we naturally do well. Generally, is listen well. And so, you know, when someone's talking, we're often thinking about the answer that we want to say to the first bit they've said, and then we don't even hear the rest of the story because we're already. And so it is an art. It is something. And someone else brought this up before. And, you know, I do a little test with people. I run workshops on active listening, and I do a little test. I've never had anyone get very good in active listening, and actually running workshops where you teach people to practice active listening. It's actually a learned skill. And so again, if we want to listen longer, we actually have to learn how to listen properly, not just to be quiet and switch off and start thinking about solutions and, you know, the thing that we're going to say next. We actually need to be practicing and learning that active listening, which I think is really important. My 3 questions of curiosity that I want to give to you that I use a lot. The first one is just the acronym ORAWE is, and what else? It's just so many times that you'll start a conversation with someone and they'll share what's going on. They're not getting to what's really going on. And so I'm asking a deeper question. And what else? Okay. And I'll listen. And what else? Sometimes I'll ask that question 3 times. And you'll be surprised at what comes out after that and what else. Because often when people are sharing what's going on in their life or sharing their story or being vulnerable, they're sharing some surface stuff, but they're not actually getting to what's really going on for them. The next question that I would use a lot, particularly in coaching, is what is the real challenge for you here? So I'm wanting them to be thinking about okay, so here's my problem, but actually what is the real challenge for me? Because often what you'll find is that what they're telling you is sometimes an outcome or you know, or it's what they're experiencing, but it's actually not the challenge. The challenge is something different. And that can be, you know, whether that's in business or whether that's in a relationship or you're mentoring someone, you know, at any level. That question for me is a great question because it helps them. Again, what we're trying to do is to get them to think about it. We're trying to be curious. We're trying to get as much conversation out of them as we possibly can to listen to what they're saying. You know, what is the real challenge for you here? And then my last question, I mean, I have a repertoire of questions, but one that I use a lot is, so what do you want? I think sometimes we forget to ask that question. And so that to me, again, you'll often get a response to that question of silence because they're like, that's a great question. What do I want? And actually what we're trying to do is actually get them to think about what's going on for them and actually what do they want? Where do they want to be? What is the change that they want to create? And so those kind of three little questions I find really helpful in mentoring and coaching, specifically for this staying curious, listening longer and inviting them in to the dialogue. And I reckon the wisest people, that the sages that have the answers or have the solutions, they don't just give them to you. And I think if you're a fly on the wall in some of those, what you talked about, those campfires when people are gathered around and there's that wise old person that's lived life, and he's not just going to tell you what to do. He's going to invite you into the journey and ask you questions and get you to contribute. And yeah, he's going to share some of his story and that kind of stuff. And I think for me, in a mentoring relationship specifically, that's the key, is the story sharing. And is necessarily telling people what to do. I still think they're following this curiosity and listening because they know that's going to create the best outcomes. They might guide it and lead it and, a little bit more and offer some little pieces of experience along the way. But yeah, I definitely think they'd be asking questions and being curious. Yeah, look, I feel really privileged to be in this space. When I look around the room, there's a lot of wisdom and there's a lot of great people doing some great things. And so keep doing that. And, if there's one thing you can take away, I guess, from today, I think it is just the power of curiosity and listening longer, and learning how you can do that in an effective way in whatever you're doing.